think I'd care or stop and stare? I couldn't be an oil if the hens refused to lay, or if bulls gave milk some way. Do you think I'd care that they're fair? I couldn't be an oil if everyone stood on his head and on his hands he was sure I'd still eat crackers in my bed. What have I got to lose if we eat soup with the pork, or if babies brought the stark? Do you think I'd care? I'd still declare I couldn't be an oil.
Let me come backstage with you.
I seem to remember you came backstage once before.
Marlene Dietrich lives on in our minds not simply as an actress or singer, but more eventful than her movie plots. Though married, she had numerous affairs with her leading men and many other famous figures of both sexes. She led a complicated life.
She was a magnificent actress in real life, much better than she ever was on the screen, or was permitted to be on the screen. Well, I think that's probably what was a great tragedy in her life, although she would never have recognized it as a tragedy. I say it is. I think Dietrich's life is a tragedy from beginning to end.
It's you, Lily Marlene.
Dietrich was born in 1901 in a small town near Berlin. Her father was a police lieutenant, and he bequeathed Marlene a military sense of duty. But he died when she was young, leaving her mother and a local school to bring her up. Quietly, she began to rebel. When she was only 16, it was common gossip at school that she had bedroom eyes. She got one professor sacked, and her first significant affair was with her violin teacher. She had musical talent, but only used it as an entree to the world she couldn't wait to join, the cabaret circuit of decadent Berlin. She threw herself into club life, first as spectator, then as a chorus girl. These were heady days in the Germany of the early 20s, and the entertainment was raucous and uncensored.
We all should have been in Berlin then to go to cabaret. Places like this, there were other places. Cabaret had been around Berlin since the turn of the century, and there were still a lot of those places with sawdust on the floor. In the early 20s of Berlin, of Marlene on stage, and the reviewer says, as for Marlene Dietrich, legs, legs, legs. Marlene was very ambitious, and in her ambition, she occasionally forgot to wear undergarments when she went on stage. This gave certain segments of the theatrical audience in Berlin reasons to visit her shows again and again and again.
Her choice of clothes were a mark of Berlin's atmosphere of sexual freedom. One moment she was enticingly feminine, the next she was dressing like a man.
She wore trousers, which in Berlin in the 20s, in Sodom and Gomorrah, Berlin, was absolutely acceptable. Bisexuality was an acceptable trait in Berlin. It was not even discussed or considered strange. There were gay bars, there were bisexual bars, there were anything you wanted was out in the open. So she came from that background.
Despite all this, she took the conventional route and married in 1923. She had a baby, her only child, Maria, a year later. Though they only lived together 5 years, Dietrich and her husband Rudi stayed married for the rest of their lives. He worked in the German film industry. The famous director was in town to cast his first talkie about a cabaret club called the Blue Angel.
Von Sternberg wanted to make the Blue Angel in both German and English, so he was very careful about the actors that he was casting, and he'd had trouble casting the cabaret singer. Then one night, he went to the Berliner Theater, and when the curtain went up, he discovered that the leading lady was played by Marlene Dietrich, and she played, of all things, an American. And he discovered further she could act, she could sing, she was beautiful, and lo and behold, she could speak English.
3, 3, and 3. 3 cheers for the gentleman who has drawn the first prize.
That's all I had to say in one sentence, yes. And he saw me there, and he asked the company to call me in the morning, and he made me come there. And I couldn't understand it. I thought, I know the book, but there is no small part in it at all for...
Sternberg wanted to take her to America. He thought he could make of her as big a star as Greta Garbo was for MGM.
I left Berlin the night of the opening night. I was on the ship going to America, and I got cables, and they said that I had a big success, which I never thought I would have.
She got off the boat bolstered by her success in Germany, but completely unknown in America. She decided to play up her image as the ingenue plucked from nowhere by Sternberg, and reinvented her recent past.
She never admitted that she had ever made silent films because, in her opinion, and I quote Dietrich, only Garbo and Gish did silent films. I never. And that became then the truth as far as the world were concerned.
Paramount's future star moved into a home provided for her by the studio. After a year, she brought Maria over to join her, and the family unit became Marlene, Maria, and Josel von Sternberg. He was contracted to direct all her movies, and the association prospered, personally and professionally.
She flowered in his hands. She became the fulcrum of his taste. They absolutely became indistinguishable in some way. Sternberg's use of light and shadow, someone said he was the Leonardo of cinema, and she was his Mona Lisa. His obsession was woman, the politics of desire, the mystery of sexuality, and if anyone could radiate, could encompass all of these enigmas, it was she.
Lorsque tout est fini, quand demeure votre beau rêve, pourquoi pleurer les jours s'enfuir, regretter les anges partis? Les baisers sont flétris, leur roman vita s'achève, et l'on reste à jamais meurtri quand tout est fini. May I have this? Of course.
I still think that's the most startling star introduction in the history of motion pictures. Marlene was the first great star to be created in the sound era. And how did he do it? She sings a French song from the turn of the century, dressed in men's clothes, turns, gives a very obvious lesbian kiss to another woman. And this was the introduction, because von Sternberg made sure that except for Paris and Berlin, Morocco was seen throughout the world before the Blue Angel. This is the Marlene Dietrich he wanted us to see and remember.
She's an extraordinary woman, and she was a great beauty and very easy to respond. She responded beautifully and gave me an image very often which was not only exactly as I wanted, but very often better than I wanted. And she was she was quite a gal.
The Sternberg-Dietrich collaborations continued. She earned the title of Hollywood's undisputed Empress of Desire when they made their fourth film together in 1932. Shanghai Express was to be the most successful of them all. Sternberg made her a vision of unapproachable, world-weary sophistication, less through her acting than through image and lighting. It was a lesson Dietrich would always remember.
She learned from her great original director, Josel von Sternberg. She had learned where her key light should be and how she should be lit to get what she called her butterfly, which is the sort of shadow shaped like a butterfly under her nose. And she was always really conscious of her lighting. Every move she made, every expression she pulled, was keyed to that lighting.
Dietrich soon seemed to have absorbed all that her mentor could teach her. As she outgrew Sternberg, their partnership began to fail, both at the box office and in their personal lives. Many people saw their seventh and last film together as autobiography rather than fiction.
I'm romantic, so romantic, that I often wish I had a more discreet heart. But believe me, please believe me, when I tell you that I haven't got a sweetheart.
The Svengali had become completely disillusioned with his protege.
Did you hear me say that I had none? No, I only said I haven't one.
At Paramount, it was an open secret that Marlene was having affairs with Maurice Chevalier, with Gary Cooper, with whatever star of the moment she was attracted to and who was attracted by her. And I think this tortured von Sternberg to a degree, but it was as if Marlene had said to him, look, you knew I was married when you met me. You didn't expect me to be faithful, did you?
Let me go. Don't you touch me, or I call for help.
Are you mad, Concha? I came here as a friend. Suddenly you throw yourself into my arms, and now you accuse me.
I kissed you because I loved you. For a minute.
He just suffered, and it tore him apart. And he would pass the dressing room door, and when the door was locked, that was always a cue for everybody that nobody entered. And if you do that enough times, and you see it enough times, and then she comes back to you always, this wonderful enigma, and that makes you love her all over again, no matter how much, you know, your mind is churned like in a wringer for laundry, you know, back and forth, this emotional seesaw. And he finally couldn't take it anymore.
You've gone too far. You're not going to play with me anymore.
Ah, this is superb. He threatened me.
What right have you to tell me what to do? Are you my father? No. Are you my husband? No. Are you my...
Dietrich and Sternberg were finished as lovers and collaborators. To make matters worse, the film then flopped at the box office. But she was now Hollywood's highest paid female star, and she could afford to travel and spend more time with her increasingly extended family.
Marlene's domestic situation was basically with a series of lovers, all of whom were accepted by Rudy, her husband, who had his own domestic relations.
A ménage à trois, we understand. A ménage à quatre and ménage à cinq was very normal in the house.
Marlene, for instance, had a very well-known affair with Douglas Fairbanks, where Douglas Fairbanks moved into a schloss in Austria with Rudy and his girlfriend. These were very modern people. They were modern even by today's standards. I think you have to look at somebody like Madonna today, who may not be quite as daring as Marlene was in her day.
December the 10th, 1936, one of the most momentous days in the history of England. On this day, the decision of King Edward VIII was awaited with anxiety throughout the empire.
Marlene was in London making Night Without Armor, and Douglas Fairbanks was making pictures here as well. She was appalled at the idea that Edward VIII should consider giving up his throne for Wallace Simpson, the American divorcee. And she announced to Douglas Fairbanks that she was going to get into her car and that Briggs, the chauffeur, was going to drive her out to the country where she personally was going to sacrifice herself for the British throne. She was, I guess, going to seduce Edward VIII into staying King of England. They stopped her at the gate.
After her attempt to save the monarchy failed, her next vacations were in the south of France.
It's a hazy afternoon, and I know a place that's quiet, except for daisies running riot, and there's no one passing by it to see. Come spend this lazy afternoon with me.
She didn't come alone. At various times, at least 6 past or present lovers joined her. But pride of place was given to her new passion, Erich Maria Remarque, author of All Quiet on the Western Front.
She would put down the blinds in the suite in the Cap d'Antibes with a hot sun outside and the white Mediterranean light. And she would say to Remarque, she would say, "My sweetheart, you write, and when you're finished, you come out of your room, and I will have your meal ready for you on the beach." And here she was, the epitome of what every author has ever wanted in a woman, completely his slave to his work and his adulation and adoration of his ability and his talent. And she would leave him, close the door behind him, and go downstairs and have an affair with Kennedy. You know, to her, she had done what Remarque expected of her, what she wanted to do for him at that moment. She was his. And once that door was shut, she had done it. Then it was on to the next.
Next at Antibes was one of her female lovers, millionairess Jo Carstairs. But while she and Marlene went off together, they left 14-year-old Maria with a female employee of Carstairs who assaulted her.
I judge Dietrich not because of my being raped. That I have to live with and have come to terms with and is behind me. But that it should be permitted by a parent to put a child in danger. That you cannot permit anyone to do that, whether they are a movie queen, a world icon, or God Almighty. You do not put your own child at risk, particularly if you're not innocent of that risk. But her version was that it never happened. Nobody would dare. This was also another facet of the Dietrich character, that anything that she didn't like didn't exist. People of extreme fame can get away with living the way they wish to live, because the world and our society, unfortunately, is warped enough to permit them to do so. And in Dietrich's case, this was very convenient, because she did not accept things that were uncomfortable to her.
There's something naive on the part of the public and the reader if they really expect these stars to have been saints or normal in any way in their private lives. They weren't. They weren't good mothers. They weren't good they weren't anything except stars. This is where all their mental and erotic energy went.
Her holidays on the Riviera had been made possible by a 2-year absence of movie work. 7 of her last 8 films had failed, and the press had taken to calling her box office poison. Then, in summer 1939, she took a call offering her a kind of Blue Angel role opposite James Stewart in, of all things, a Western. At first she laughed. Then she took the next boat home.
Bartender! See what the boys in the back room will have, and tell them I'm having the same. Go see what the boys in the back room will have, and give them the poison they name.
Josel von Sternberg had made Marlene the world's reigning sex goddess. He'd also made her the world's most highly paid woman. But he made her untouchable. And by 1939, she was the world's most unemployable woman, until Universal said, come over to us and make a horse opera. She did. It was the greatest comeback in screen history, and it turned her into a very rare thing, a glamour girl with a sense of humor.
My glory and my fame, just see what the boys in the back room will have, and tell them I died of the same.
She sort of got to be the mainstay of the whole thing. It just amazed everybody.
True to form, Dietrich was falling in love again with her leading man, and he with her.
She has this fight with this girl, and Marlene, just as they were starting to do the fight, Marlene said, "What are those two girls with our dresses on?" And they said, "Well, they're going to do it. You can't. We want a real fight." And I said, "Una and I are going to do the fight." Well, if you remember, the fight was the darndest fight scene you've ever seen. When she started throwing stuff at me, she said, "Now, I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to throw it or where. You just make sure that you duck, because I'm going to throw it right at your face." I didn't realize she was such a good shot.
Who's buying me a drink?
Radio on Wheels moves to where the entertainment is. And when a songwriter and a movie star make for the front, the mobile station follows right along.
Hello, boys.
Why, it's Marlene Dietrich!
Reach for the sky, you coyotes. It's me, Dead-Eye Dietrich, the sheriff.
Cheapers, it's the arm of the law.
The legs ain't bad either.
Gee, ma'am.
When America joined the Second World War, Dietrich was one of many Hollywood stars who went out to entertain the troops. She'd become a naturalized American when she saw what Hitler was doing to her homeland, so she had extra motivation to take part.
What's your phone number?
Actually, I think Dietrich wanted to be a soldier, and you couldn't very well be a soldier. So she fought her way, and she did a magnificent job. Certainly when she was finally overseas, she practically was a soldier. I mean, the way her stories went, it was her boys, she was in the army. She never said, "I was with the USO." She was in the army, and she really came into her own. The Prussian soldier was in his element.
Yes, we were simple soldiers.
You had no grade?
We had no grade, no. We only had a grade in case of capture. We were captains, and I always thought it was rather silly. We should have been generals, no? Because it was only a matter of money or how they treated you in case of capture. Naturally, we were all very much afraid of capture. I was, very much.
Here she is, lovely Miss Dietrich.
Hello, boys.
She'd get a tremendous ovation just by being there. She'd come out and she'd talk to them, make a few suggestive jokes and get a good reaction on those. Then she'd sit down and play the musical saw, which is very incongruous. I mean, it just struck the guys to have this glamour creature that they'd always seen and heard about, and there with this big saw between her legs. And then she'd sing a few songs in this husky whiskey tenor of hers, and they just loved it.
Just see what the boys in the back room and tell them I sighed and tell them I cried.
and tell them I died of the same. And when I died...
She was one of the most popular of all the troupe entertainers and spent 18 months constantly touring. It wasn't just her talent and her glamour that endeared her to them. The fact was she was prepared to lay down her body for the cause. Her dedication extended to fulfilling the servicemen's fantasies.
It was part of the romanticism that, you know, if you're going to face death, don't you want to live one time really magnificently before you face death, right? And she felt that being with, if a young boy, a soldier from Arkansas or in the South somewhere, could sleep with a movie star who was beautiful and giving and loving, was that not a proper way to prepare for the morn of his demise?
She didn't restrict herself to the enlisted men. She had a more lasting affair with the paratrooper James Gavin, the youngest general in the army.
I suspect that she was fascinated by him. He, after all, was a gigantic hero, and he did look like sort of a cross between Henry Fonda and Gary Cooper.
I mean, come on. Did she choose an ugly general? You know.
When the war ended, Dietrich went to Paris, where she met up with several old friends, including the actor Jean Gabin. With him, she began the most serious love affair of her life.
Marlene fell in love with Jean Gabin, and I think she would have left Rudy and she would have married Jean Gabin. She always loved things French.
She loved him as far as Dietrich could love. And he was volatile enough to make it interesting, I think. He would throw her out, which had never happened to her before, and she would come begging back, which was a role that she rather liked playing, although she complained about it, but she enjoyed every minute of it because he would always take her back. So she was victorious in that.
But also in Paris was General James Gavin. And Marlene's affair with General Gavin apparently lopped over into Paris. And it was through that affair, I think, that Jean Gabin understood that Marlene was not a one-man woman, and this was not a relationship that he was willing to continue on that basis, and he threw her out.
Want to buy some illusions, slightly used, second hand. They were lovely illusions, reaching high, built on sand.
She left Paris and returned to Hollywood, where she made a film called Foreign Affair, which was about post-war Berlin. On the piano was Friedrich Hollander, a composer who'd also written the songs for The Blue Angel and Destry Rides Again.
You are in love with me.
And the director was someone who'd known her since her days as a cabaret singer in Berlin, Billy Wilder.
Die kannte ich aus Berlin, als ich ein Journalist und die war auch zurück von der Front, nicht? Ja. Die war so mehr an der Front als ich war und natürlich mehr an der Front als der Eisenhower. Wir waren Freunde durch all die ganzen Jahre, als sie hier mit dem Remarque war und dann mit dem Gabin und wir waren große Freunde.
The film was wonderful for her because it played with an old pal, and he let her have fun playing it slightly off one shoulder, and she resented that she had to play maybe a Nazi. That disturbed her very much. But she trusted Billy enough that he would have the comedy offset what might be indicated that she had been a Nazi, and he did.
You are an American woman?
We'll ask the questions here.
What is the name of the man?
Yes.
Johnny? Johnny what? I see you do not believe in lipstick. And what a curious way to do your hair, or rather not to do it.
Now, wait a minute. Do you know who you're talking to?
An American woman. And I'm a little disappointed, to tell you the truth.
Also, Jean Arthur, whom she detested because she said that ugly, ugly pluck chicken, she called her, had a very difficult role that did not really suit her talent as well as the role that Dietrich had suited her, so she won the film.
It's such a change. This dress. This dress is from Iowa?
Oh, no, Berlin. Do you like it?
Oh, it's stunning, but haven't you got it on backwards?
Then in 1950, Hitchcock's film Stage Fright gave her the chance to upstage another young actress. This time it was Oscar winner Jane Wyman.
Dear Madam, this will introduce my cousin Doris, who is in every way a good girl. I hope you'll find her satisfactory during my illness. Sign, Nellie Good.
This is very nice, if you can call morning nice. But, isn't there some way we could let it plunge a little in front? I suppose not.
Stage Fright and Foreign Affair, in which she played respectively with Jane Wyman and Jean Arthur, are in some ways two of the cruelest spectacles I've ever seen, and I blame Hitchcock and Billy Wilder for that to some degree, because she can't help but upstage them. I mean, they look, and both of these are attractive women, but they suddenly become church mice in her presence. She just, first of all, is, she has a graduate degree where they're in kindergarten as far as her narcissism and her sense of the camera, and they just shrivel in her presence.
You won't mind if I depend on you a great deal? Thank you, darling.
As she approached 50, the Dietrich image was harder to sustain.
It's so depressing.
I think that her reputation was such that everybody knew that she was very careful and very pernickety and very concerned about her physical image, her looks, and certainly she took a long time in makeup and wardrobe, and insisted on having her clothes done by Dior, which she had. I mean, she was well preserved.
I'd be glad of the rest for a week or two. Palm trees, sunshine, lovely.
She showed me one day, she used to, before she always wore a wig in later years, because she plaited in tiny, tiny little plaits all around her face, and then she pulled them up and tied them at the top. And so the whole thing went right up, and then she put the wig on top of that. It was marvelous, but I don't know how the roots were with all that pulling.
Dietrich was still capable of attracting her leading men. On Stage Fright, she had an affair with co-star Michael Wilding, who went on to marry Elizabeth Taylor, 30 years Dietrich's junior and Hollywood's new great beauty. Two more ex-lovers then did exactly the same thing. Dietrich's opinion of her rival-in-love was almost unprintable.
Elizabeth Taylor was a huge problem for Marlene, because there had been Michael Wilding, married Elizabeth Taylor. There had been Michael Todd, married Elizabeth Taylor. Then there was Eddie Fisher, married Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was younger. Elizabeth Taylor married men that Marlene had dalliances with that didn't last. Time was beginning to tell.
It was now easier to co-star with old boyfriends than with new ones. When ex-lover Michael Todd produced Around the World in 80 Days, the 54-year-old Dietrich played opposite 3 others who were claimed to be her old flames.
Get out and stay out. If I ever catch you in here again, I'll cut you up in 1,000 pieces.
That won't be necessary, I assure you. I'm just leaving.
George Raft and David Niven were 2. Frank Sinatra III. Her confidence as a glamour girl now gained an unexpected boost when she made a series of live appearances. When she became ringmaster in a benefit for charity, a hotel owner saw her and invited her to Las Vegas to perform in cabaret.
First I said no, and then they kept on asking me, and finally I weakened. And I did it in Las Vegas, and I loved it from the very first time I did it. But at that time, you know, I didn't sing any serious songs. I was just entertaining everybody and being beautiful, something like that.
In 1953, she began a residency at the Sahara Hotel that had the effect of relaunching her entire career. Audiences who knew her from movies had no idea what an experienced live performer she was.
My people, it's baseball, it's worth.
The boys all love my music, I can't keep them away. So my little pianola keeps working night and day.
She even had a series of special gowns created for her that gave the illusion of being very revealing. She called them her nude dresses.
Part of it that was so appealing to her was that it was direct to the audience. This is something that went back to her very earliest days in show business. The way she loved being loved by people. What could you ask more than to be loved by 200 people or 2,000 people? And that kept her going. I think it fueled her the way applause fuels all true performers.
It's not 'cause I shouldn't, not 'cause I wouldn't. And you know, not 'cause I couldn't, simply because I'm the laziest gal in town. My poor heart is aching to bring home the bacon, and if I'm alone and forsaken, simply because I'm the laziest gal in town. I'm just lazy.
Dietrich became the highest paid cabaret artiste in the world. She repeated her success in London and finally on Broadway. But she became the most eccentric of travelers.
Now, I don't know whether anybody out there in the audience has ever heard this about Dietrich, but everything had to be clean where she was. She was a freak about it. She traveled with her own Ajax, so, you know, just for... And her own SOS pads and her own soap and her own everything. She would arrive at a theater and completely clean it, not have them clean it. She would clean it. She was famous for this. She came to my dressing room just to wait for all of us. We were all going to go to supper together. So I said, you know, make yourself coffee, make a drink, whatever. And she completely rearranged my makeup table. She cleaned the entire dressing room. It was not to be believed. I couldn't get over it.
The New York Times dubbed her Queen of Ajax. Broadway changed it to Queen of the World. Every ticket there sold out weeks in advance, and she won a special Tony Award. She had toured her show through Europe, Japan, Australia, South America, and Russia. She still made occasional movies, but this was now her main career. She even risked returning to Berlin. It was her first visit since the end of the war, when they'd called her an enemy and a traitor. Many Germans didn't want her back, but she won over a hostile audience and took 18 curtain calls. She toured from the late 1950s to the early 1970s.
Alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat.
The lifestyle was beginning to take its toll.
Well, she'd always sort of had a little nip behind stage. She used to like to have a glass of champagne to clear her throat between songs while the audience was going crazy applauding for her. Marlene would have a little bit of Dom Perignon and go back on stage and charm everybody.
Yeah, it got pretty scary at times. I would always kiss her before I went on stage to conduct the overture, and as soon as I got within, you know, a few inches of her, I could tell. And I'd say to the orchestra, watch me very carefully tonight, you know, because she would skip bars, or she'd forget what the next song was, or she'd forget a lyric or whatever.
Until finally it got so bad that she would wave it, you know, she would totter. And then, you know, she would totter. And then she fell in one of those moments of stupor. And she fell quite often, but she didn't break anything. And then that one time she fell.
She was lying at the edge of the stage saying, "Bring down the curtain, bring down the curtain." Her leg had broken, and it was a compound fracture that went through the flesh. It never healed.
Nobody knew this because we used to bandage her leg with water compresses underneath this shimmering dress. And for me, It was a macabre and yet amazingly moving idea to see this shimmering body standing on that stage in that pink light all by herself, this soldier alone on the battlefield, because a stage is like a battlefield. And underneath I knew that there were these oozing wounds.
I get no kick from champagne. The alcohol doesn't thrill me at all. So tell me, why should it be true that I get a kick out of you?
I dried her out 3 times. 3 times she was sober. 3 times she was dried out. 3 times she remained sober because of the accidents, because no surgery could be performed on an alcoholic. That's very, very dangerous. And each time I brought her back from the hospitals, straight to that bottle, straight to those pills.
In 1976, her husband, Rudy, died. Though they hadn't lived together since the 20s, he'd remained a faithful friend and support. Without him, her will to continue working finally began to fade.
It's a terrible thing to watch self-destruction in someone who has been that perfection in that realm of what we call fame and beauty and looks.
Just a gigolo, everywhere I go. People know the parts I'm playing.
Dietrich eventually retired from the stage in 1976 when she was 74 years old. But she made one final appearance in 1978 in the movie Just a Gigolo. For many, it was unintentionally poignant.
Youth will pass away. Then what will they say about me? When the end comes, I know they'll say just a gigolo. And life goes on without me.
She withdrew into her Paris apartment and never left it again. For the final 13 years of her life, she lived in seclusion. The last 12 she spent in bed, connected to the world only by her telephone.
Any degenerative thing, any decay of the Dietrich picture, the legend, was abhorrent to her, not because she was afraid of age, but because she was afraid of tarnishing the legend. It's a big difference, and it's very difficult for people to understand. Because most women, when they become old, don't want to look in the mirror and hide themselves because they don't want to face. That was not Dietrich. Dietrich did not become a recluse because she didn't want to face her age. She became a recluse because the legend no longer was able to be re-embellished.
Marlene Dietrich died on May 6, 1992. Her funeral was held at her favorite church, La Madeleine, in Paris. The tricolor on the coffin bore medals she'd won for her service in the war against Germany. Ironically, her coffin's final journey was to Berlin. She was buried close to her mother. Marlene was dead, but the image of Lola Lola, the Blue Angel, that was not.
We often think of her not as being an actress, but as being Marlene Dietrich. She became a legend. She knew she was a legend. She kept it alive for 90 years.
I think it's great to be an icon, to be a movie star, but you cannot pray to these people. I have great respect for the profession of Dietrich. great respect. As a human being, I reserve my respect, but not as a professional.
Ich bin von Kopf bis Fuß auf Liebe eingestellt. Ich kann halt Liebe nur und sonst gar nichts.
Love's always been my game. Play it how I may. I was made that way. I can't help it. Men cluster to me like moths around a flame. And if their wings burn, I know I'm not to blame. Falling in love again, never wanted to. What am I to do? I just can't help it.